In Google Maps, you could see not only digital maps, but also satellite images. And of course, you probably have tried it many times. But actually, what could we see with that satellite images in Google Maps? That's one of the very important questions. And we could see satellites and sometimes even aerial photography with a pretty detailed level, just by clicking. This is just New York City, Manhattan Island. So you could see with a satellite view for the same area. And as we zoom in, we could see pretty many details in satellite images or in aerial images. Sometimes all this level of details becomes available. So here we just see the part of the New York City, the Central Park, famous one, and I believe this is even not the satellite imagery, but the aerial imagery in this particular case. In fact, you never know for sure which particular imagery Google use. Basically, they use satellite imagery, of course. And for example, this is also another picture for Moscow, where definitely Google does not employ any aerial photography. For Moscow, Russia, only satellite imagery is available, but you see also, you could see very, very detailed images. But actually, what we can and what we cannot see in satellite view in Google Maps, and do we actually always understand what do we really see? In this presentation, I collected many screenshots from Google Maps. Of course, I could show it live, but it would take more time. Just I collected a number of screenshots just to see from different parts of the world. And the first question is, what could we actually see in the most advanced satellite images today? First of all, could we see the people? Basically, the response to this question is yes. Like, for example, in this particular image for Washington, D.C., this is the National Mall and the capital of the United States. And you could see a number of people walking across the National Mall. But I believe here we see mainly shadows of the people. We could see particular persons only just as a dots or a few dots, but looking at the shadows, you could maybe learn a little bit about this. That's another image from the Central Park in New York. Probably this is an aerial photo in this particular case, but even with their photo, we could see particular people, but we cannot identify even a gender of people. We cannot identify the color of skin, for example, or we cannot see the face of the people. So we cannot identify a particular person with satellite imagery. Of course, from Hollywood movie, we could sometimes we could learn like with satellite images, like with satellite videos, you could follow particular people or identify car numbers. All of this is still just fantasy, science fiction. This is not yet the reality, not yet a little bit. And so we could identify, we could see particular persons, but we cannot identify them. We even cannot identify I don't know, the gender, the age, the nationality or race, basically nothing. At least we could see even maybe the color of something, but still cannot identify. Also, that's another example. People in the Red Square in Moscow, Russia. Also, you could see many people here. You could identify probably any particular person, but you cannot. You could tell nothing about everyone. You could just somehow you could count how many of people is here, but you cannot even say how many men and women are walking across the square. Same, even if you zoom in too much, you will still see not enough details. Mainly you will see shadows from people, but cannot really identify them. And same everywhere in the world. Whatever part of the world you will look, well, you could see people and cars. For example, this satellite image is from the city of Antananarivo, the capital of Madagascar. And if you would zoom in, also you could see people. You could even count how many of them is here. You could see cars in pretty much detail, but hardly you could say something else about these people. About the cars, that's another example from Moscow Capital Beltway from Russia. You could identify more or less the type of a car. Yes, you could separate trucks from regular car. You could probably separate vans. You could see color of the cars, but hardly you could even identify a model of car. Of course, if some only 2 or 3 models would be presented in certain area, and if they would look very differently, then probably you could separate them. But basically, you cannot say is it a I do not know, Mercedes or Volkswagen or whatever is it, or Toyota. All of them look the same, more or less. You could see the different colors, you could see tracks, you could see vans, you could see small cars, you more or less could identify size, but nothing else. Also, that's just another example from a parking lot at Walmart in New York. Probably here it is even better quality imagery with drones, with airborne imagery, but still you cannot see any more details, and hardly you could identify even the model of a car. Not to speak about the number of cars, that's definitely not possible. All of this is a Hollywood movie fantasies about the car numbers reading. Even if you zoom in too much, still you cannot do it. Same from Beijing in China or somewhere else in the world. Any large city you could take and you will see more or less the same picture. Okay, but also I would like very briefly go through images of various natural landscape, how you could see in satellite images with that pretty high level of details, pretty high spatial resolution, how you could see different natural landscapes like forest or wetlands or deserts or ice, mountains or rivers and lakes. Let's just very briefly go. I have many images, but we will go quickly through it. This is just humid tropical forest in Papua New Guinea. You could see just closed canopy of tropical rainforest, and as you zoom in, you could even identify probably single trees, but of course you cannot identify tree species or something else like that. Another example from northern Madagascar, from Montanambre National Park, Montandambo National Park, actually, French name. This is a relatively intact, dry, deciduous tropical forest. Also, you could identify particular trees, but you could say, hardly could say something else. You even cannot say if they're deciduous or evergreens. Degraded tropical, dry tropical forest in Senegal and West Africa. Here you could also see particular trees, but also you could see that the trees are pretty small. I would say part of them are hardly could be called trees, they're mainly bushes, and you could see some open place. I believe it is just heavily degraded forest by logging, grazing, and other human pressure. Let us go more far north to temperate forest. Here's a broadleaf and mixed temperate forest in Western Russia, but it is mainly secondary forest also here. But here you could also try to identify even tree species. Sometimes you could see particular crones of particular trees, and in tropical conditions, hardly you could say the species. But for more northern areas, especially in Europe, where we have limited number of tree species, you could try to guess the tree species, but it is also usually it is hard to do so, even with that high resolution satellite images. But sometimes possible. If you zoom in very much, you could see even differences between different tree species. And if you will go far north to the boreal forest, at least you could definitely see here that most of the species here are not broadleaf, but with a needle-leaf coniferous forest. If you will zoom in, of course, you could know a little bit about that forest, but you could see, you could at least separate deciduous, broadleaf trees from coniferous needle-leaf trees are typical for the very far northern areas. And now from forest to some different kind of wetlands. This is a tropical wetlands in Pantanal, Brazil, probably the largest tropical wetland in the whole world. You could also see some particular trees and bushes, but mainly you also could see some open areas, very wet grasslands, and some small pools of water. This is how wetlands look like. That's another example. This is a wetland, this many small lakes, very far north in Western Siberia. As you could zoom in, or you could also see sometimes particular trees or bushes, but also you mainly could see that structure of many lakes and more dry locations between them. And this is another example from Northern Eurasia, from northwestern Russia, from European part of Russia. This is an example of so-called string bog. This is the bog which contains structures of ridges and depressions. You could see that the structure in the satellite images, and as you will zoom in, you will see that there are some trees and bushes growing over the ridges in the depression, some of that. And this is a typical structure for many large bogs in the northern Europe. Another example from more southern areas, subtropical forests form forested swamps. So the wetlands with trees growing over it. This is Everglades, Florida in the United States, not exactly the territory of a national park, but another nature reserve close to it. And when we zoom in, we could also see particular trees, but we could see also open area, and in more wet conditions, the trees are small, and in some cases, more dry locations, they are higher, but this is all of this is just very swampy area. And from very wet to very dry areas, here are this very nice looking picture. These are sand dunes in Northern Sahara Desert in Algeria, Northern Africa. So, and this is pretty small scale picture. Just pay attention to the lower right corner. There is a scale bar of one kilometer. And you could see that these dunes are pretty large. And as you would zoom in, you will see the internal structure of the dunes. And as you will zoom in even more, you could see virtually every particular big stone in this sense. And still see no sign of any kind of vegetation, which is just bare ground, sand, which is moving with wind and making these dunes. Just a few another examples of sandy dunes. This is a Taklamakan Desert in China. Also, as you will zoom in, you will see the another level structures, and also see particular dunes of sand in the desert. And these are sand dunes with some sparse vegetation. That's another desert in Central Asia and Turkmenistan, Karakum Desert. So you could see that it is not totally bare ground, but also some small bushes, even some small trees, very specific desert trees, and some other sparse vegetation, but still there's a lot of open sand. And that's another extreme location in the in Chile, in South America. It's Atacama, actually the mountain desert. It is not a sand dune, but also bare ground, extremely dry area, and you could see virtually no vegetation here, just the tracks of erosion. And very quick move to another part of the world. That's again Central Asia, but this is not a sand. This is actually the surface of open salt. This is a salt pan in Uzbekistan, also in an extreme desert dry area, but it is a former salted lake which evaporated this salt pan, and there's in the dry season it is just open surface of virtually poor soil for salt, reflecting some sunlight, and looks very white. Yeah. And there is also some examples of grasslands. In grassland, you will also, even with a very high resolution image, you will see virtually no trees. And the grass looks like, just different colors of gray and gray-green. And hardly you could separate them from the desert, but definitely there is no dunes, no sand. You could see that it is the vegetation. This is the alpine grassland in northern Caucasus, very up in the mountains, so open space. But we also see the pretty diverse and dense grass vegetation. Another example, this is savanna in Tanzania, Serengeti, famous Serengeti National Park. And you could see even some single trees, but all the rest is covered with different kinds of grasses. And this is also pretty dry area in Eastern Africa. As we will zoom in, you could also see particular trees and particular bushes, but they're mainly grassland everywhere. Another example of a grassland from South America, so-called llanos. That's the local name for that type of prairies. And here you could see that the bushes and trees are located along the temporary waterways, and all the rest is also just this not really bare ground, but the bare ground in combination with very dry grassland. You could also just, if you will zoom much, you will see no bushes and trees here. And another example of dry grasslands, dry steppes in lower Volga region in southern Russia. Here, as you will zoom in, you will see the tracks of cattle driven across that very dry landscape. You could see also some vegetation, but it is mainly grass, and maybe it's very little bushes here and there. And finally, the classical dry steppes, huge open grasslands in Mongolia. And you could see also no single trees, but as you zoom in, you will also see the tracks of human footprint, like these tracks of some vehicles in the open grasslands and some road, and also some tracks of vehicles across the grassland. And finally, that's North America. That's tall grass prairies in northeastern Oklahoma in the United States. Also, you could see some trees along some lower elevation location along the waterways. And here you could see only grasses and also some tracks of human, probably by cattle, by some vehicles. Everything is somehow disturbed by human being. And another extreme example from very dry to very wet area. This is Amazonia, one of a river, and you could see this meanders, how in a very flat area this turns, the river does, and also some old waterways by time separated from main water course, and existed as lakes or bogs. And this is a very typical picture for water streams in a very flat area. Just that's another river in Amazonia. You could also see that some part of a former river course, river they were separated and existed as a small lakes. And if you will zoom in, you will see also these tracks of former waterways, which are now not the main outside the main water course, but still contain some water and wetlands vegetation. So-called meanders of porous river in Amazonia. And similar picture you could see in the river delta, in the area when the big river comes to the sea and create the large delta, the area covered with river sediments, and we could see waterways from these sediments depositions. And here this is mangroves in Bangladesh, and this is Sundarban, probably the largest preserved mangroves area in Asia. And also, as you zoom in, you could see some mangrove trees and bushes, and the waterways through this. It is partly salted. It is a kind of swamped forest on the seashore. Just also the same mangroves and wetlands in Gambia River in West Africa. Also, you could see this wetland landscape. And that's just similar looking example, but this is the islands and river branches in Rio Negro in Amazon. Also, you could see when in the flat plains, the river could create that diversity of shorelines and water and terrestrial and mixed landscapes with many wetlands and many river branches. Like here, if you zoom in, you could also see single trees and many waterways between this small island, and this is a very important area for biodiversity, hugely. This also looks like a river, but it is actually the river of ice. This is a glacier. This is this is a Columbia Glacier in Alaska in the US. So the ice is slowly moving down slopes, and we could see it as a kind of rivers. If you will zoom in, we will see the surface of the ice with many trenches, and it is slowly moving down to the sea. And that's another glacier in South America, it's called Vitima Glacier in the boundary of Argentina and Chile. Also, if we'll zoom in, we also see just another type of surface, but also with many trenches created by moving these ice down slopes to a nearby lake. And also, if you will also continue walking virtually through mountain landscapes, this is some highlands in Himalayas, close to Everest in Nepal-China boundary, and you could see the shadows of some particular mountains and ridges. And if you zoom in, you could see this slope with many stones, very unsustainable slopes, moving stones with pretty sparse vegetation on it. You could see virtually any particular big stone on the slope, but hardly you could see any single tree. It is very up high in the mountains, so vegetation is also very sparse here. And that's another extreme location. This is Urals Mountains in Russia. It is a very northern part of this mountain range. And although this is not so high mountains as Himalayas, for example, and they are much less tall. So you could see it is completely covered by snow in the winter because it is a very far north, and the winters are long here. You could see some also trees on the slopes, and also the signs of some erosion, water erosion, and even maybe snow erosion, and some water streams under ice and snow. And that's another mountain. It's the highest point of Africa, Kilimanjaro volcano. This is used to be active volcano pretty recently. And you could see even the crater of this volcano. So it is not active right now nowadays, but it was active not so long in the geological history, and you could see it as all these volcanic structures you could see here. And finally, one of the last mountain ridges in Iran, in Middle East. You could see all this structure of mountain ridges, and if you zoom in, you could see also the structure of a valley and also some vegetation, pretty sparse vegetation, which is also very extreme dry uplands with very poor and sparse vegetation, but still you could see some trees, some bushes, and also some temporary waterways. And this, again, this is not, it looks like a high mountains location, but this is artificially done. Of course, it is a mountainous area in central Siberia, but all this lunar landscape is human-made. It's a coal mining quarry in Kemerovo region, and if you will zoom in, you will see some heavy machinery mining this coal and transporting this out of the quarry. And all this structure is also very typical. Actually, the human footprints we could find everywhere in virtually any landscape, but also just to show the last interesting picture, this is something very specific, space launch pads. This is a launch complex by SpaceX in the Cape Canaveral spaceport. And also, if you zoom in, you could see many details, but still hardly you could see the face of particular people or identify the type of number of particular cars. But you can see still this enormous large structure of the spaceport infrastructure and this construction for launching rockets into the space. Similar picture is a little bit lower quality. That's a launch complex from Baikonur spaceport in Kazakhstan, and this particular launch complex is famous because first man in space started exactly from here. So I think we will, at this particular point, we will end our excursion over Google Earth. So you could, I could invite you to do your own studies over Google Earth and find many interesting satellite images here and there and look some transportation. Thank you.